Scoot this over here in my own grip. So hi folks, so I'm going to start by telling you about something I was really wrong about. In 2002, I guess, I went to work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I thought that, thank you, and I wasn't wrong about going to work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that was really right. But I went to work for, thank you on behalf of EFF, who are fantastic and deserve your support as well as the CBLDF. But I want to tell you about the thing I was wrong about, because I got there and I thought that the big issue was going to be copying. And I thought that for a couple of reasons. The reason that I thought the big issue was going to be copying is that the internet is fundamentally a medium. The internet is basically a medium made out of copies, right? So, say back in 1995, there's a guy named Bruce Lehman, who was the Clinton copyright czar, and he was in charge of copyright policy in the heyday of the internet. And he went to the Al Gore National Information Infrastructure hearings in 1995. That's where we got the term information superhighway. It was the hearings on how we were going to demilitarize the internet, make it available to private people, private individuals, the private sector. And he said, I've got a proposal for this, for accommodating copyright to the internet. And here's how it's going to work. What we're going to do is we're going to have separate licenses for every copy made on the internet. And Al Gore was like, every copy? And he was like, yeah, every copy. So here's how it would work, right? So I click on a web page, so the first thing that happens is the hard drive on the remote server spins up and makes a copy of RAM. That's one license. And then the RAM drops that into the network buffer, so that's another copy, which then buffers it up at the router, which is another copy. And then that makes the next hop to the next router. That's another copy. And then that goes to your SWID proxy, and that's another copy. And then that goes to your browser, which makes a copy on the hard drive and a copy in RAM. And every one of these would be separately licensed, right? One after the other. What he was doing is he was treating copying as like a specialized, venerated activity, as though copying were something that involved like hiring an artist and having him paint a copy, or inking up a roller and running it over some paper and then sticking it on a press, right? As though copying were something that required an industry, and everyone who conducted copying would naturally have an office, and in that office would be a lawyer, and the lawyer could be relied upon to negotiate the licenses, right? Copying as an industrial process. Well, copying in the age of the internet is not an industrial process, and when you try to fit this model of copying to it, it just falls apart. So what you end up doing is you end up criminalizing all these people, 70 million American file sharers, and everyone just ends up kind of running from the law all the time. And it's not a good situation to be in, and it had all these ugly outcomes, right? 20,000 students have been, or young people and families have been sued. You might have heard that we just had one of the most seminal victories in this. There's a woman who, disabled single mother, who was accused of downloading gangster rap with her 5-year-old or 7-year-old daughter, who then said, well, but you can look at my hard drive, we never pirated anything, and they said, the record industry, they hire these like boiler rooms full of collection agents who said, we don't want to look at your hard drive, we want $3,000, you're never going to hear the end of us. And she said no, and she found someone who's willing to defend her, and the RIAA went and looked at her hard drive and refused to release their report on what they found there, and then eventually the judge forced them to release, and it turned out they didn't find any evidence of piracy, but they figured they would still sue her, and they were asking for damages of $250,000 per track, and they accused her of downloading all these tracks. So all these bad outcomes happened. So it was natural for me to think that copying was going to be the seminal issue of the internet, but as I say, I was totally wrong. I was wrong because it turns out that what the internet is really, really good at, what the internet has been brilliant at, what the internet has been so good at that we've actually missed it happening, is making it cheaper to do stuff together. So this sounds like a kind of casual thing, like doing stuff together, like getting together for a game of basketball or getting together to go to a movie. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but in fact, doing stuff together is the principal endeavor of the human race. Right? Ronald Coase, the first chief economist of the Federal Communications Commission, won the Nobel Prize in economics, mostly for a paper he wrote called The Theory of the Firm, a 1937 paper that talks about the fundamental action of every firm, every institution, whether it's a religion or a political body or a corporation, of getting people to all get together and do stuff. right? So General Electric is not a company that's generally electrical. Right? General Electric is a company that has a set of processes and tools that they use to get a bunch of people to do stuff together. That's why General Electric bought NBC. Not because General Electric thought that NBC was also generally electrical, but because they thought they could marshal those resources and get them all pointed in the same direction and moving to do stuff together. So doing stuff together used to be expensive. And the cost of doing stuff together, the search cost of finding the people who wanted to do this stuff with you, like who else is into this obscure comic book, or who else wants to help me fan sub this manga, or who else wants to help me fly an airplane into this building, or who else wants to help me found a political party, or who else wants to help me, who wants to fall in love with me. All of those things are the kinds of collective endeavors that have this search cost associated with it. That's the first cost that the internet demolished. And then the second cost was the transaction cost of actually getting everyone coordinated. So who wants to bring the rice to the potluck? Who wants to bring the cabbage to the potluck? Who wants to write the part of the operating system that handles the file system? Who wants to write the part of the operating system that handles the user interface layer? Who wants to write the encyclopedia article about a manga article? And who wants to write the encyclopedia article about a species of whelk? Right? These coordination costs, generally speaking, constituted the bulk of the cost of any human endeavor. Right? Who's gonna sit down in front of the tank, and who's gonna call the lawyer when they get arrested? Right? Those costs, getting together and arguing about that stuff, as anyone who's ever tried to get like more than 5 people to go to dinner, constitute the bulk of what we end up doing. And so in the 10 or 15 or 12 years since the National Information Infrastructure hearings, I didn't tell you actually, Al Gore turned to Bruce Lehman and he said, Bruce, I understand that you want full employment for copyright lawyers, being one, but that's not the purpose of the National Information Infrastructure hearings. Get bent. So Bruce being a resourceful guy, he decided that he would go to the United Nations, to an entity called the World Intellectual Property Organization that has the same relationship to bad copyright law that Mordor has to evil. And he convinced them in 1996 to bring in the not the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, something called the WIPO Copyright Treaty that became the Digital Millennium Copyright Act here in America. And so thank you, yes, it needs your hisses. And in Europe, it's the European Union Copyright Directive, and in Canada, it will shortly be Bill C-61 unless we stop it. Australia got it, Chile got it as part of the Free Trade Agreement with the United States, and the Central American nations got it as part of the Central American Free Trade Agreement. So all these countries have actually got kind of a watered-down version of the Lehman proposal. And it was in fighting kind of the next iteration of this that this came to me, because the UN or WIPO was not content to have merely passed the WIPO Copyright Treaty. They wanted to kind of extend the work of the WIPO Copyright Treaty and create a whole new layer of rights to sit on top of the internet to require people to negotiate more licenses. I presume it's the same kind of deal that leads, was it Harvard that thinks that they own the Griffith copyrights?
Yeah, that was a state to them, but as an academic thing. It was just kind of
right, I see. Because made in 1915, no one holds a copyright to that. You don't need Harvard's permission. You don't need anyone's permission. It's in the public domain. That's what it means, right? So they wanted to create this new layer of rights that would have created perpetual copyrights in some cases, and would have nevertheless required people to negotiate with a whole new layer of broadcasters who had not actually created anything, they just modulated it, and would have overruled the Creative Commons licenses that at that time 53 million people had adopted in the space of like 2 years. So the UN was undertaking this terrible treaty negotiation called the Broadcasting Treaty, and I went in as part of a coalition of non-governmental organizations to fight it. And we were completely outgunned and outclassed. We'd never been to the UN. We had no idea how the procedures worked. Every time we wanted to go to one of these meetings, we would have to fly to Geneva and stay in a youth hostel, because Geneva hotel rooms are incredibly expensive. And then we'd go to these meetings where we had no idea what the procedure was, and there would be like 7 of us and 200 members of rights holder groups, and they had been underway negotiating this stuff for like 7 years, and we'd just shown up kind of in the last 6 months to tell them to stop. Right? So we just had no idea how we were going to make it happen. My colleagues at EFF thought that it was kind of a fool's errand, but we had a grant to do it. And so I was determined to do it. Some other people were determined to do it. We managed to get about 20 non-governmental organizations involved, so we had 20 or 25 people there at every one of these, and we'd wear different hats, and some of us represented like 3 different non-governmental organizations. They're all kind of running around as very comic and Marx Brothers of us. But we had no idea how we were going to make it work, but we did what we usually do when we get to some place where people are saying stuff that we disagree with. We started writing it down.